Welcome to the first week in review by One Stop News. I'll be covering a variety of topics from around the world today, but I'll begin with my two featured stories of the week, a profile of Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch, and an in-depth look at the protest and military crackdown in Cameroon. Let's begin with Neil Gorsuch. If confirmed, he will take the seat of the late Antonin Scalia. He is 49 years old and was born in Denver, Colorado. Being this young, he could potentially hold this Supreme Court seat for decades. He holds degrees from Columbia, Harvard, and Oxford, and was a classmate with former President Barack Obama in law school at Harvard. He has served as a clerk for two Supreme Court judges, served in the Department of Justice for a time, and has been on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Colorado since 2006. However, it is unlikely that these qualifications will really be a focus in his confirmation hearings, and the focus will be on his political leanings and ideas. So I'll do my best here to create a brief summary of them, or the ones that will be important in the confirmation. His overall philosophy relies on a strict reading of the Constitution, and he follows an originalist philosophy of law. This means that he prefers to go back to what the law meant at the time of its implementation, rather than what it means now or what it's going to mean over time. And to get into specifics on some of his policy leanings, Jeffrey Rosen of the National Constitution Center, in an article by Politico, has said that he has some liberal views, particularly when it comes to criminal law and the rights of religious minorities. And he's more willing than Scalia to defend regulations. He is a conservative favorite, though, and there are several reasons for this. Gorsuch believes that judges should be responsible for interpreting law in regards to regulations, not the federal bureaucracy. This goes against the precedent set in Chevron USA versus Natural Resources Defense Council in 1984, which gave federal bureaucracies the power to interpret regulations. I doubt this will be terribly contentious in his confirmation hearing, but it is important nonetheless, as what a judge's views on regulations is incredibly important for his rulings. And what will likely be the focus are President Trump's comments on the judiciary, because Democrats will likely attack him about President Trump's comments, and his views on reproductive rights and abortions, one of the major sticking points in the court. Gorsuch is rumored to be unhappy about Trump's comments, but he has not made any public statement about them at this time. His views on abortion and reproductive rights are not clear exactly, and it's difficult to interpret from his court rulings. It's clear that he's very against assisted suicide, and since he's a conservative, it's fairly likely that he is pro-life. What this means for abortion is unknown yet. His view on contraceptives is a little more clear, but it's only from one court case that he ruled on, and this was the Affordable Care Act's provision that all groups had to provide contraceptives, even religious groups. And he dissented on the ruling, saying that it provided an undue burden on religious groups, which would prevent them from practicing their religious freedom. The example he cited was the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic group whose focus is helping the elderly and those in poverty. And some will cite this as saying that he is against contraceptives and is way too pro-life. I personally look at it as he views these restrictions as an undue burden on religious freedom. If I had to guess, though, regardless of what his dissent stated, it will still be brought up and he will likely be attacked for it. And if you want to read more about Gorsuch, I have several links in the description providing a more detailed view on him. The second featured story of the week are the protests in Cameroon and the crackdown that followed. The demonstrations began in November in the English-speaking Northwest, and they had grievances against the French-speaking government for not following through with their constitutional promise to be a bilingual nation. After the protests grew, and they carried on for a few weeks, the army began to use live ammunition to break up the protest, and they killed 4 in December. This prompted calls for secession, and protesters have told businesses in the region to stop paying taxes. Demonstrations have continued to spread throughout the English-speaking region, and government forces have responded with violence, with several reports of beatings and intimidations. Dozens of protesters have also been arrested and transported to the capital Yaoundé, and there are fears that they are being tortured there. These protests were originally started by lawyers and a group called the Cameroon Anglophone Civil Society Consortium. The group itself has been outlawed, and its leaders are among those arrested, and they have been charged with inciting terrorism. The government has also instituted an internet blackout in the region, and they have warned that any spreading of information on social media that can't be proved could lead to up to 2 years in prison. It seems quite clear that these measures are to prevent information from leaving the region, which is a common tactic of repressive governments. The protesters have also started carrying out what is called a ghost town movement and have asked shops and schools to close down in protest of the government. The protesters, however, are not wholly innocent, and they have reacted with violence directed at school teachers and shopkeepers who have not followed through with the ghost town movement in the Anglophone region. The whole situation looks like it's going to carry on for a while, and on Friday 2 more were killed and 10 were wounded in the town of Bamenda as they protested outside of a police station demanding the release of prisoners. I'm sure y'all have heard plenty about Trump, so I'll start with the international news today. In Russia, opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been handed a 5-year suspended sentence for alleged embezzlement. He has denied these charges and has vowed to appeal. What's important about these charges is that they would prevent him from taking part in the 2018 election, but he said that he will run anyway. Romania's government has managed to survive a vote of no confidence. The ruling coalition did not attend the vote, which means they didn't have quorum and weren't able to carry out the vote. The court this week will rule on the withdrawn decree that would have decriminalized corruption in the state. On Thursday, Germany reported a $294 billion export-import surplus, the world's largest. This news certainly won't hurt Angela Merkel's bid to remain Prime Minister. On Wednesday, British Parliament members sponsored a bill that would begin the Brexit process. However, Britain may owe up to $78 billion in commitments to the European Union, which could prove to be a very big sticking point in negotiations, as many will claim that they don't have to pay it. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and opposition leader Yulia Tymoshenko have both asked Donald Trump to pay attention to its ongoing war with Russia. Moscow, on the other hand, continues to deny its involvement in the conflict and has denied any connection to hundreds of tanks, artillery systems, armed personnel carriers, and rocket systems that are present on the rebel side of the conflict. Now, it's difficult to imagine how else they would have got them. In Panama, Jurgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca, the founders of the Mossack Fonseca law firm at the center of the Panama Papers, have been arrested in Panama City in connection with the Brazilian Petrobras scandal. 122 people have died in the state of Espírito Santo in Brazil as police strike over pay. The Brazilian military has been sent in to restore order, and 703 officers of the state have been charged with revolt. Former Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo is facing corruption charges for allegedly receiving $20 million in bribes over a fruitful contract given to Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht to build a road from Brazil to the Peruvian coast. In Haiti, Jovenel Moise was sworn in as president last week following several months of uncertainty. Initial elections were annulled after allegations of fraud and then postponed again due to Hurricane Matthew. He has also been under investigation for money laundering, which are charges that he denies. The European Union has promised Gambia a €225 million rescue package to help the nearly bankrupt country begin its new democracy. 75 million of these euros will be immediate, which will certainly help the country get back on its feet, while the rest will be given incrementally. In Kenya, a court has blocked the closing of the world's largest refugee camp at Dadaab. This closure would have resulted in 200,000 refugees being sent back to Somalia. The Kenyan government said it would appeal this decision. Mohamed Abdullah Farmajo has been elected as the president of Somalia. The election has given Somalians hope that al-Shabaab can be effectively countered, although they still remain a massive threat to the country, and they're dealing with lots of problems that will take a long time to solve. President Farmajo himself is a dual citizen, and he actually holds U.S. citizenship as well. He was previously prime minister of the country in 2011, but was forced out after 8 months due to unstable conditions. His first challenge will be dealing with a famine that is currently gripping the country, and the famine. In South Africa, opposition groups got into a fight with parliamentary guards after they denounced President Zuma as, quote, rotten and a scoundrel. Zuma faces charges of corruption that appear to be true and is under pressure from his own party, the African National Congress, to step down. In Syria, President Assad has said that U.S. troops are welcome to fight terrorism. However, Assad defines any group opposing him as terrorist, and since the U.S. supports Syrian democratic forces opposed to Assad, it is unlikely that the U.S. will take him up on his offer. This is not the only news in Syria, in the past few days, as a Russian airstrike has led to the death of 3 Turkish soldiers and wounded 11 more. This has generated a strain in already tense relations between the two countries. In Israel, a Palestinian gunman wounded 6 in an attack near a market in central Israel. The attacker is an 18-year-old man from the West Bank. On the other side of this conflict, an airstrike on a Gaza Strip tunnel has killed 2 and wounded 5 more Palestinians. Israel claims these tunnels are used to ferry terrorists and weapons, while Hamas and people in the Gaza Strip claim that they bring food and other humanitarian supplies needed in the blockaded region. Now, it's likely that both of these claims are true. In Yemen, 12 million are at risk of starvation as the civil war in the country carries on. The UN has estimated that $2 billion is needed to prevent the situation from deteriorating into a widespread famine. In Turkey, President Erdogan has approved a bill that would reform his constitution and expand presidential power. The reform would allow him to issue decrees, declare emergency rule, appoint ministers and state officials, and dissolve parliament. Opposition parties have stated that this removes balances to Erdogan's power, and it's hard to see it as otherwise. Pakistan has extended the legal right of Afghani refugees to remain in the country until the end of 2017. There are currently 1.3 million Afghani refugees registered in the country, but their situation remains tenuous at best as Pakistan has stepped up deportations and criminal checks on the Afghani refugees. The U.S. commander in Afghanistan, John Nicholson, has requested several thousand more troops to help train soldiers for the Afghan army. Afghanistan has seen a resurgence of the Taliban and other insurgent groups, and there are claims that Russia is funding and supplying the Taliban, which has resulted in this new stalemate between government forces and it. A suicide attack targeting soldiers in Afghanistan has killed 7 and wounded 20 more. The attack came as soldiers were at a bank collecting their pay. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack. The UN has estimated that over 1,000 Rohingya Muslims have been killed in a crackdown by the Myanmar army in the Rakhine state. The situation remains dire for the Rohingya Muslims, and I will be doing a featured story on their situation next Sunday. And before I go back to U.S. news, a Chinese military plane had a, quote, unsafe encounter with a U.S. Navy plane in the South China Sea, according to U.S. Pacific Command. The Chinese plane came within 300 meters of the American plane over a contested reef in the South China Sea. It does appear that this incident was accidental, and there hasn't been much reaction from either country about the affair. And now on to news in the U.S. Kellyanne Conway has come under fire for promoting the Ivanka Trump clothing line, an action that many from both sides of the aisle have condemned. This comes after Nordstrom removed the clothing line from their stores, which had prompted President Trump to tweet at them in response. The BBC has provided an interesting view on this story, and it's one that I can see being true. They have made the theory that Kellyanne Conway has made the statement to draw away attention from President Trump's own tweet at Nordstrom, as a president attacking a private business is problematic. This issue falls into deeper ethical concerns about the Trump administration. And First Lady Melania Trump has filed a lawsuit in New York against the Daily Mail alleging $150 million in lost financial opportunities. The suit is about false allegations published by the Daily Mail that she had worked as an escort prior to her marriage with President Trump. President Trump's cabinet is also coming together, as Tom Price and Jeff Sessions were confirmed as Health and Human Services Secretary and Attorney General, respectively. Both of these nominations were opposed by Democrats, but they were forced through by the Republican majority Senate. The main problem the Democrats have with Tom Price is that he appears to be the man that will lead the dismantling of the Affordable Care Act. Jeff Sessions, on the other hand, was held up by allegations of racism that reached a peak when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell silenced Elizabeth Warren for her reading of a piece by Coretta Scott King that accused Jeff Sessions of racism. President Trump has also appeared to make a shift in policy regarding China, and he's asserted that the U.S. will follow the one China policy that has been in place for decades. While this will ease some tension with China, bigger issues relating to trade in the South China Sea still need to be addressed. In other diplomatic news, President Trump has held a press conference with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and affirmed his commitment to the deep ties between the U.S. and Japan. He's also pledged to help protect all areas under the administrative authority of Japan. The deeper meaning of this statement is that Japan holds islands in the South China Sea that are claimed by China, and that the U.S. will back them up as a result of this, which is good for Japan and will likely rankle some feathers in China, although they would likely have expected this regardless. Construction on the Dakota Access Pipeline resumed Wednesday. The Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, however, has asked a federal judge to halt the construction while a lawsuit they filed last year is in the courts. The lawsuit they have filed could potentially stop the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline in that region entirely. This isn't the only potential construction in the news this week, as the Department of Homeland Security has come out with an estimate of $21 billion in 3.5 years for the proposed border wall in Mexico. And believe it or not, there is some news from the U.S. that isn't Trump-related. Ohio Governor John Kasich has delayed 8 executions as the courts determine whether or not the 3 drugs used in the executions are constitutional, as there is concern that they cause an undue amount of pain. I hope y'all enjoyed. If you have any feedback, any criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments or message me. It's super helpful. And plus, I'm starting a new thing. All of my sources will be in the description, so if you want to do any further reading on any of the stories, you can just find it right there. And I hope to see y'all Wednesday.